This problem says assume that a firm sells high-quality noise-canceling headphones for $180 each. Use the information below to construct the firm's demand curve for labor. Before we get started in this problem, it's important to remember that a firm's demand curve for labor or any resource used in production is going to equal the marginal revenue product for that resource. Therefore, before we begin, we need to stop and review what marginal revenue product is. A firm's marginal revenue product, or MRP, is equal to marginal product times marginal revenue. In this case, we have units of the variable factor of production, which in this case is labor per week, and we just have inputs of 0, 1, 2, and 3. We have our output, and from this we could compute our marginal product. There's going to be no marginal product at an output of 0 because we have no starting point. But going from 0 to 1, and as a brief aside, recall that marginal product is just going to be the change in output, which I'm going to abbreviate as Q, divided by the change in the variable factor. For number 1, for 1 unit of labor per week, to find marginal product, we would take 14 minus 0 divided by 1 minus 0, which is just 14. Of course, with marginal product, anytime we have the units increasing by increments of 1, the marginal product is simply going to be the change in output. When labor per week equals 1, our marginal product is just 14 minus 0. At 2, it is going to be 26 minus 14, which is 12. Remember, technically, it would be 26 minus 14 divided by 2 minus 1, but 2 minus 1 just equals 1, and anytime a denominator equals 1, the total ratio is just the numerator. For 3 units of labor per week, our marginal product is 10. Now, for our marginal revenue, we're going to assume that that just equals the selling price. So our marginal revenue is going to be constant throughout, and it's going to be $180 per unit. So our marginal revenue product, for 1 unit of labor, it's just going to be 14 times $180, which is going to be $2,520. At 2 units of labor, marginal revenue product is going to be $2,160. Again, the $2,160 is just 12 units times $180 per unit. And for 3 units of labor, marginal revenue product is $1,800. Using this information, we can construct the firm's demand curve for labor. On our x-axis, we're going to have the quantity of labor demanded. On the y-axis, we're going to be looking at different levels of the resource price, which in this case, recall, our price is weekly wage. When units of labor is equal to 1, we know that marginal revenue product is $2,520. When we use 2 units of labor per week, we know that the marginal revenue product is equal to 2,160, and at a quantity of 3, we know that the marginal revenue product is equal to 1,800. So we plot these points. We have 1 in 2,520, 2 in 2,160, and then 3 in 1,800. We connect those points, and that's going to be the firm's demand curve. The reason for this is, remember, what's going to determine whether or not a firm is going to use a resource, whether we're talking about labor or equipment or anything like that, what's going to determine whether or not a firm is going to utilize a resource is whether or not the firm will generate more revenue by using the resource than it will have to pay. For the first worker, the firm would be willing to pay $2,520 per week. Once they have the first worker, they wouldn't be willing to pay as much for the second worker because the second worker isn't going to generate as much revenue as the first. So the firm would only be willing to pay $2,160 for the second worker. For the third worker, the firm would be willing to pay $1,800 per week. If for whatever reason the prevailing wage per week for workers was $2,000, the firm would only hire 2 workers because they wouldn't hire the third worker because the third worker would only generate an extra $1,800 in revenue, but the third worker would cost $2,000. This is how we would construct the firm's demand curve for a resource. Obviously, in reality, we would need a whole lot more than 3 points to construct a full demand curve, but I just used 3 points here for illustrations so that you guys could get an idea of the underlying concept.